Teleological view. Is the universe similar to a created artifact? Are they similar enough to allow for a meaningful analogy? Hume argues that the two are so dissimilar as to disallow analogy. Further, we know so very little about the universe that we cannot compare it to any created thing that is within our knowledge. If we want to employ a valid analogy between, say, the building of a house and the building of the universe, we must be able to have an understanding of both terms. Since we cannot know about the building of the universe, a design analogy for the existence of God is nothing more than a guess. Louis Berkhoff stated that the world everywhere reveals intelligence, order, harmony, and purpose, and thus implies the existence of intelligent being. The universe is characterized by order and useful arrangement. Therefore, the universe has an intelligent and free cause. The world everywhere evidences intelligence, purpose, and harmony. There must a master architect behind all this evidence. Is it God, or everything we see and have is accident? The teleological argument is inductive and a posteriori. Teleological comes from Greek word telos, meaning end. The mind in question is typically taken to be supernatural. Philosophically inclined thinkers have both historically and at present labored to shape the relevant institution into a moral formal, logically rigorous inference. The resultant theistic arguments, in various logical forms, share a focus on plan, purpose, intention, and design, and are thus classified as teleological arguments, or frequently as arguments from or to design. The teleological arguments are a group of interrelated arguments in favor of the existence of God. Variations of the arguments are, among others, the argument from design, the argument from regularity, the intelligent design argument, and the fine-tuning argument. Richard Swinburne's argument from regularity. The universe might have so naturally been chaotic, but it is not. It is very orderly. It is observed that everything in the universe seems to be perfectly aligned to support human life as well as many other natural phenomena. Yet, it could have so easily not been. If the universe did not have carbon-producing stars, if the composition of the ocean or the atmosphere was different, or if the universe was slightly colder or warmer, there would be no life. The universe is clearly fine-tuned to support life. This is known as the fine-tuning argument. David Hume's response. Hume first began by calling into question the strength of the watchmaker analogy. Cleanthes puts forward a variation of the argument from design via an analogy with man-made objects. Philo proceeds to pick apart this argument. Philo first questions the validity of the analogy. If we are to suggest that the universe was designed by a mind in some way similar to ours, then where are we to draw the line of similarity? Does this mind also possess emotions? For example, is this mind part of a body similar to ours with all its fallibilities? Philo then makes the point that if we are to truly apply the analogy, then the argument of design results in a belief in polytheism. Though the watch may require only one maker or designer, this is not the case with many other man-made objects. For example, a bridge or skyscraper requires hundreds of individuals working in specified various roles to achieve its construction. Therefore, following in line with the analogy, surely the universe would have likewise required hundreds of gods to spur its creation. Even if we are to allow for a designer, we can ultimately know very little of the mind behind it all. In continuation of the analogy and its flaws, Hume makes the pithy observation that this world, for aught he knows, was only the first rude essay of some infant deity who afterwards abandoned it, ashamed of his lame performance. Hume further disproves the analogy. We know that the watch comes from the watchmaker and the house from the architect. We know this empirically based on our experience. However, we have no experiential evidence of universe makers. We would need to have some sort of similar experience with universe makers or the creation of material worlds to properly make this analogy. Therefore, due to this huge inferential leap, the argument is barely even comparing like with like. Almost every debate over teleology involves defining reasonable evidence of design. This simultaneously demonstrates both the greatest strength and greatest weakness of teleological arguments. In one sense, philosophers have struggled to objectively express the boundaries of evidence of design. Teleological arguments are thus framed in terms of likelihood and assumption. This leads to further debates over applying mathematical probability. On the other hand, human experience routinely distinguishes between intent and accident. Attempts to reject teleological arguments often run counter to the principles used in virtually all other circumstances. Arguments for design are more intuitive than objective, so they can be difficult to assess. In strict logical terms, many events we interpret as intentional could be the result of something random. Improbability does not necessarily imply intent. At the same time, and for the same reason, teleological arguments derive great strength from the extreme odds involved. Just because something is possibly random does not mean it's reasonable to assume it really was accidental. A common term when debating teleological arguments is gaps. Critics frequently miscast teleological explanations as "we don't know how this happened, so God did it." This is referred to as the God of the gaps. In some cases, this criticism has merit. Reaching the end of our understanding does not necessarily imply the next casual step is direct intervention of a deity. Framed in that way, arguments in favor of God are logically weak. At the same time, merely pointing out the appearance of design and intent is not a gaps error. If something appears to be deliberate, considering that fact is not an argument from ignorance. It's a positive use of all information. Those claiming God of the gaps often confuse mechanism for agency. Explaining how something happened does not logically explain away intent. Arguments for design only require that certain situations strongly correlate with intent or purpose. Teleology does not require disproof of all mechanisms leading to the end state. An automobile steering involves multiple steps between the movement of the tires and the intent of the driver. Pointing out the existence of power steering, an electronic control unit, or the entire series of machinery would not excuse a driver who wrecks the car. Learning how something happens does not mean there is no who behind it. It is also common to respond to teleological arguments with an atheism of the gaps approach. This simply says, blind randomness cannot explain this yet, but we should assume we will eventually. This is an especially common tactic when dealing in issues such as abiogenesis, where observations move beyond improbability into what seems like impossibility. Teleological arguments are useful, though not logically absolute. Viewed in the context of normal human observer, they take on great potency. In fact, the lens required for some critics to dismiss these arguments speak to their value. Critics of religion frequently concede that biology and nature give every appearance of being designed. The only justification given for concluding otherwise is preference, that is, because the existence of God or any divine influence must be refuted at all costs. This comes across very much like a poker player saying, "It strongly appears that I am cheating, so please be sure to assume I am not." For those lacking such bias, probability and common sense lend weight to the value of teleological arguments.